What would you do if the sound of rushing water shattered your sleep at midnight? What if you had only minutes to grab your children and run, knowing the walls of your home might collapse behind you? And what if survival meant abandoning everything you had built, leaving it to be swallowed by the dark, raging flood? This is the story of one family's desperate escape from a flash flood, a disaster that unfolded not in the light of day, but in the terrifying uncertainty of the night. It is a story that mirrors the experiences of thousands of families around the world who have faced the same nightmare. Water rising without warning, homes turning into death traps, and the primal fight to live another day. The family lived in a modest home at the edge of a valley known for its winding creeks. They had always loved the location, the quiet, the view of the hills, the sense of peace. For years, the risk of flooding felt distant, something that happened on the news, not in their backyard. But the night it happened, a relentless storm hammered the region for hours, dumping more rain than the land could hold. Creeks turned into rivers, rivers turned into torrents, and the valley became a funnel of destruction. At first, it was the sound that woke them, the unusual roar outside the windows, like a freight train rushing through the night. The father stepped onto the porch and felt the spray of water already licking at the steps. Within minutes, the backyard was a river. He shouted for his wife to grab the children. They scrambled in the dark, pulling blankets around sleepy bodies, searching for shoes, clutching phones and wallets with trembling hands. The mother remembers the fear in her children's eyes. They didn't fully understand, but they knew from the urgency in their parents' voices that something was horribly wrong. As they fled out the front door, water surged across the driveway, sweeping away trash bins and branches. The car was their only hope, but even as they climbed in, the tires struggled against the current. Driving out was chaos. Roads had become rivers, landmarks disappeared under the flood, and visibility was nearly zero. Other cars, panicked drivers, and stranded neighbors added to the confusion. At one point, they had to abandon the main road altogether as the water swallowed it whole. The father navigated by instinct, steering toward higher ground, ignoring the GPS that had no idea the roads were gone. For the children, it was terror and awe. The youngest cried, asking if their house would be gone. The eldest sat in silence, staring at the walls of water slamming against buildings as they passed. Every moment carried the fear that the engine would stall, that they would be trapped in rising water. They saw headlights ahead sink into the flood and prayed the same fate wouldn't reach them. Hours felt like days. Eventually, they reached a shelter set up by emergency responders at a high school gymnasium. Exhausted, soaked, and trembling, they joined dozens of other families sprawled across cots and blankets. The air buzzed with disbelief, neighbors recounting the speed of the flood, the suddenness of it all, the homes and possessions left behind. Some had lost pets, others had lost vehicles, and many did not yet know what they had lost. For this family, survival carried both relief and grief. They were alive, but their home, their belongings, and their sense of security were all at risk. The next morning, they returned to find the house unrecognizable. Mud coated the floors, walls buckled from the pressure, and cherished memories, photographs, heirlooms, children's drawings, were gone. The house was still standing, but it no longer felt like home. The trauma of that night lingered long after the waters receded. The children woke from nightmares of rushing water. The parents wrestled with guilt. Could they have left earlier? Could they have saved more? Rebuilding was not just about repairing walls and floors, but about restoring a sense of safety that seemed forever broken. Yet there was resilience too. Neighbors who had once been strangers became allies, sharing tools, meals, and comfort. Volunteers arrived with supplies. Churches and charities offered assistance. The family found strength in community, realizing they were not alone in their suffering. The flood had taken much, but it had also revealed a bond among survivors. Stories like this one are unfolding with increasing frequency as climate change drives more extreme weather. Flash floods, once considered rare, now strike towns and cities with alarming regularity. Families across the United States and the world are facing the same midnight terror, the same fight for survival, the same uncertain future. This family's escape is not just a tale of survival, it is a warning. It shows how quickly safety can dissolve, how fragile our assumptions of stability really are, and how essential it is to prepare for the unthinkable. Their story is a reminder that floods are not distant tragedies on a television screen, but real events that can shatter lives in an instant. As we explore their journey, we also confront the larger truth. Survival is not just about outrunning water in the night. It is about confronting the systems, policies, and choices that put families in harm's way. It is about understanding why floods are intensifying and what we can do to ensure that fewer families must flee into the dark with only minutes to spare. The family that survived that night will never forget the sound of water pounding at their door, the fear in their children's eyes, or the relief of reaching high ground. And we should not forget either. Their survival story belongs to them, but the lessons belong to us all. The experience of fleeing a flash flood in the middle of the night is not simply about a single event. It is about the aftermath, the layers of consequence that follow once the waters recede. For the family who escaped with only the clothes on their backs and the weight of terror in their minds, the days, weeks, and months that followed revealed just how deep the scars of survival can run. If the night of the flood was about instinct and fear, the morning after was about reckoning. When the family returned to their home the next day, escorted by emergency crews and allowed only limited access, the sight was overwhelming. The neighborhood they had once known, familiar streets, welcoming porches, carefully tended lawns, looked like a battlefield. Mud covered everything in sight. Vehicles were half buried in debris, power lines sagged dangerously, and entire sections of road were washed away. The air reeked of gasoline, sewage, and rot. Their house was still standing, but only barely. Inside, the damage was worse. Furniture was overturned. Family photos floated in filthy water. Children's toys were caked in mud, and the walls bore dark lines marking the height the flood had reached. The family's sense of sanctuary, once anchored in this space, was shattered. They realized almost immediately that they would not be able to live here for weeks, perhaps months. The father walked through the rooms in silence, noting the structural damage, while the mother broke down as she picked up a ruined wedding album. For the children, it was a surreal moment. Home was supposed to be safe, yet now it felt hostile, alien, and broken. The first stage of survival after the escape was displacement. They lived in a shelter for several days before moving into a relative's basement. Privacy was scarce, stress was constant, and tempers often flared. The children missed their routines: school, friends, even simple comforts like their own beds. The parents struggled to navigate the maze of disaster assistance, filling out forms, waiting in lines, making endless phone calls to insurance companies, FEMA representatives, and local agencies. Each conversation brought a mix of hope and despair, as they learned how little coverage they actually had and how long recovery might take. Insurance, in particular, became a cruel revelation. They had never thought much about flood insurance. Their home was not officially in a high-risk zone, and the additional costs seemed unnecessary. Now, facing tens of thousands of dollars in damage, they discovered that their policy covered almost nothing. The National Flood Insurance Program, already strained, offered limited support. The father felt betrayed by a system that encouraged families to settle in vulnerable areas without adequately warning them of the risks. The mother wondered aloud how they would ever rebuild, how they could possibly start over while still carrying mortgage payments on a house that no longer felt habitable. Meanwhile, the children carried invisible wounds. The youngest began waking up at night, screaming about water pouring into her room. The eldest withdrew, refusing to talk about the flood but drawing pictures of storms and dark rivers at school. Teachers, noticing the signs, referred them to counselors, who explained that trauma in children often surfaces in ways adults might not expect. The family realized that surviving the flood was only the first battle. The fight to restore a sense of normalcy would be much harder. Community played a powerful role during this stage. Neighbors, who had once exchanged only polite greetings, now became lifelines for one another. They organized cleanup crews, shared meals, and pooled resources. Churches and volunteer groups arrived with supplies, bottled water, cleaning products, donated clothing. Strangers showed up with shovels and determination, helping to clear debris from yards and salvage what little could be saved. This solidarity provided comfort, but it also highlighted a difficult truth. While the spirit of community was strong, the resources of government and institutions were often slow and inadequate. The parents began to notice the inequities of recovery. Some families with savings and strong insurance coverage moved quickly to repair their homes. Others, like themselves, struggled to make even basic progress. Elderly residents without transportation or support systems fell through the cracks, unable to navigate the bureaucracy of aid. Immigrant families, wary of authorities or facing language barriers, received less help. The flood, indiscriminate in its destruction, revealed sharp divisions in how recovery was distributed. As weeks turned into months, the family faced the hardest decision of all, to rebuild or to leave. Their home, though damaged, could potentially be repaired with enough investment. But should they? The father feared putting money into a house that could flood again in a year or two. The mother could not bear the thought of raising her children in a place where safety felt so fragile. The children begged for the comfort of their old rooms, but even they hesitated at the thought of another night like the one they had endured. This dilemma is faced by thousands of families after floods, especially as such disasters grow more frequent. Rebuilding represents resilience, but it can also represent denial. Retreat represents caution and adaptation, but it also means uprooting lives, leaving behind memories and abandoning investments. The family debated endlessly, torn between the heart and the mind. During this time, they began attending community meetings where city officials and planners discussed long-term solutions. Some spoke of new levees, improved drainage, and modernized warning systems. Others raised the possibility of relocating entire neighborhoods out of floodplains. The father listened intently, weighing whether promises of protection were realistic or merely political. The mother found herself thinking about the future, about whether her children could grow up in a place where fear of water was a constant companion. The children's voices, too, mattered. The eldest confided to a counselor that she never wanted to hear rain on the roof again. It made her panic. The youngest clung to the idea of home, but also asked every night, "Will the water come back?" These questions haunted the parents. They were not just making a financial decision, they were shaping the mental and emotional landscape of their children's lives. Eventually, the family made a choice that countless others have had to make. They decided to leave. It was not easy. They grieved as they packed what little remained, saying goodbye to neighbors who had become family. They cried as they walked through the house one last time, touching walls that had once held laughter and love, but now carried only scars. They drove away with a mixture of relief and sorrow, knowing they were choosing safety but leaving behind a piece of themselves. Relocation was not a magic fix. They faced new challenges, finding affordable housing, adjusting to unfamiliar schools, starting over financially. But there was also a sense of release. The children slept more soundly. The parents no longer flinched at the sound of heavy rain. Slowly, they began to rebuild not just their lives, but their hope. Their story is not unique. Across the country and around the world, families are confronting the same choices in the face of floods, storms, and disasters. Their survival stories are powerful, but they also expose the fragility of the systems we depend on: insurance, infrastructure, government aid, and financial security. They remind us that survival is not just about escaping the water. It is about navigating the long, uncertain road that comes after. The flood that drove this family into the night was a moment of terror, but their true survival came in the months that followed, in the choices they made, in the resilience they found, and in the courage to walk away from what could no longer protect them. Their story underscores a broader truth. Survival is not an endpoint, but a process that continues long after the waters recede. The night of the flood was only the beginning of this family's story. Their frantic escape in the dark, with children clutched tightly and possessions left behind, was the part most people see in headlines. The drama, the danger, the suddenness of survival. But what happened after? The long months of rebuilding, grieving, and ultimately redefining their lives was just as important, and perhaps even harder. Their story is a reminder that disasters do not end when the waters recede. They linger in homes, in hearts, and in the choices that shape the future. For weeks after the flood, the family lived in temporary housing arranged through emergency services. The shelter provided safety, but not comfort. Crowded rooms, the constant noise of strangers, and the loss of privacy wore them down. Meals came from relief kitchens, clothing from donation centers. Each day blurred into the next, a routine of survival rather than living. The children, once carefree, grew restless and anxious. They asked constantly when they could go back to their own rooms, their own beds, their toys and routines. The parents had no answers. The psychological weight of uncertainty was heavier than the flood itself. The father replayed the night in his mind endlessly. Had he waited too long to leave? Had he risked the family's lives by trying to drive out? The mother was haunted by the moment she carried her youngest through the rushing water, convinced she might lose her grip. Even as they celebrated survival, guilt and fear clung to them. For the children, nightmares became a nightly ritual. The sound of rain on the roof sent them into panic. A sudden clap of thunder made them run for their parents' arms. Trauma had followed them into every corner of their new reality. When they were finally allowed back into their home, the sight confirmed what they already suspected. The house was no longer a home. Walls warped, flooring ruined, electrical systems corroded, and the smell of mildew so strong it seemed to stick to their skin. They picked through the wreckage carefully, salvaging what they could. A few family photos, some clothes, a handful of keepsakes. But the majority of their belongings were destroyed. The house that had been the backdrop of birthdays, holidays, and everyday life was reduced to a shell filled with debris. The financial toll was just as crushing. Insurance covered little because they had not been in a designated floodplain. Federal assistance was limited and mired in paperwork. Each phone call to agencies felt like a new obstacle course. They discovered quickly that survival was expensive. Temporary housing, replacement clothes, food, gas for endless travel between relief offices, and damaged neighborhoods. Their savings evaporated within weeks. The father took extra shifts at work. The mother began searching for part-time jobs, even while managing the children's trauma and the logistics of recovery. At community meetings, they learned they were not alone. Families across the region were facing the same struggles: insufficient aid, confusing insurance policies, mounting debts. Some had lost everything. Others were fighting with banks, trying to prevent foreclosure on homes now worth a fraction of their mortgages. The flood had revealed not just the power of water, but the fragility of the systems meant to protect families from ruin. The family wrestled with the impossible decision: to rebuild or to leave. Friends urged them to stay, to fight for their community. Government officials promised stronger levees, better drainage, improved warning systems. But the parents could not shake the memory of that night, the sound of water rushing into their yard, the panic in their children's cries. Could they really risk repeating that terror? Rebuilding might restore the house, but not their peace of mind. The children's voices tipped the balance. One night, their eldest confessed she no longer felt safe there. "Every time it rains, I'll think the water is coming back," she whispered. The youngest, usually so playful, clung to her mother and asked, "Will the flood come when I'm asleep again?" The parents realized then that survival meant more than putting walls back up. It meant giving their children a future not defined by fear. With heavy hearts, they decided to leave. It was not a glamorous relocation. They moved into a modest rental in a neighboring town, far from flood zones, but also far from the home they loved. They grieved for what they left behind: their house, their neighbors, their memories. But slowly, they began to rebuild a different kind of life. The children started new schools, made new friends. The parents found work and began saving again. Rainstorms no longer sent the family into panic, though the memories never fully faded. Their decision echoed a larger trend. Across the country, families in flood-prone areas are making the same painful choice. Some move by necessity, others by fear, but all share the same realization. Survival is not just about escaping the water, it is about refusing to live in its shadow. Their story is deeply personal, but it reflects a growing truth about climate-driven disasters. Each flood displaces not just homes, but entire ways of life. Yet amid loss, there was resilience. The family discovered strength they did not know they had. They learned to lean on each other, to accept help, to start from scratch. They carried forward the lesson that possessions can be lost in an instant, but life, love, and community endure. They became advocates, speaking at local forums about the need for stronger protections, clearer insurance options, and more honest conversations about risk. In sharing their story, they turned trauma into testimony. The family's survival is not just a story of one night. It is a story of adaptation, courage, and the will to move forward. It is also a warning. Floods are no longer rare, and what happened to them can happen to anyone. Their escape in the night shows how fragile safety can be, how quickly stability can vanish. Their relocation shows how survival requires difficult choices, not just bravery in the moment. And so their story becomes our story. We all live in a world where floods, storms, and disasters are growing more intense. We all face the question of how we will prepare, how we will respond, and how we will support those who must make impossible choices. Will we wait until the water is at our doors, or will we act now to reduce risks and strengthen communities? At Crisis Lens, we bring these stories to light, not just to recount tragedy, but to inspire action. Survival stories like this family's are powerful because they are real, raw, and urgent. They remind us that behind every headline are people, parents, children, neighbors whose lives are forever changed. And they challenge us to think about what survival means in a world where floods are no longer once in a lifetime, but part of a dangerous new normal. If this story has moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Crisis Lens for more stories of survival, resilience, and the hard truths of living in a world shaped by climate extremes. Like and share this video to spread awareness, because the more people understand the stakes, the better prepared we can all be. And watch the full series to see how families, communities, and nations are grappling with the rising tide of disasters. The water came for this family in the dead of night. They survived because they ran, because they chose life over possessions, because they refused to give up. But survival is not just their victory, it is a message for us all. The floods are coming faster, the risks are growing sharper, and the time to act is now.